Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, what actually caused the 0.3% increase in the CPI?
Thanks again. So just a brief recap for some of the viewers at home. So basically, when you look at the inflation statistics, particularly at the headline level, what you basically have is you have enumerators that go all over the country, and we track about 750 goods and services. Basically, what that gives you is 12 divisions, 12 classification of individual consumption according to purpose divisions called COICOB. Now, ultimately, what that then does is you get your, on the table, ones of our report, you get the core and then the food sub indices and as well as the headline index. So basically, what caused the increase, the 0.3 percentage point increase, is just a reflection of overall, market demand and supply conditions in the country as a whole. Food prices went up, as well as other non-food products. Housing, electricity division went up, transportation as well, and what else? Education. We saw some increase in education. So basically, on the urban and rural side, according to all our 12 divisions, that is from food and non-alcoholic beverages to what we call the others, the relatively minor items. We had we had an increase, across the board on the urban and rural side, which is then reflected in the all items index, as well as the food sub-index and the core sub-index.
Well, how much did this fuel scarcity issue actually affect the inflation figure?
Well, if you look at the reports, you see that the transportation index went up. So basically, the fuel prices, right? You had PMS. You had also kerosene prices also went up as well. And then what that does is you have these cascading effects or secondary effects on other items that people consume. For instance, food prices, fresh vegetables went up, tomatoes went up, and then even in the processing of food, instances where people have to use maybe a generator to mill or whatnot, you generally see an increase there as well. So you have an increase as a direct increase on transportation, on the transportation sub-index, because of the domestic issues we're dealing with last month, as well as these secondary effects which seem to affect a bunch of divisions within the food, the all items index.
Now, according to reports, Nigeria's inflation slowed to about 9% in May 2013. Is the same level what we have now, but since then it's remained below the double-digit threshold for months. Why do you think it has remained this way for a long time?
Well, most times, people would, with what has happened in the economy, people would have said, oh, depreciation, and then coupled with what would you call it? The fuel issues that we're dealing with. People would maybe want, will anticipate that prices should be substantially higher. But the markets are largely, driven by both not just demand but also supply side issues. So even though you have supply side issues like we're dealing with, if there's no effective demand to basically meet that supply side issues, supply side, then ultimately you can't necessarily have substantial increases in prices because there's just no consumer power behind it. The economy, while it has been, growth has been positive over the last couple of quarters, we know that the oil sector has struggled, and basically the driving force behind the economy now is the non-oil sector. Which you have the wholesale and retail trade and largely more informal sector activities. So basically, you don't have while there is some consumption capability behind those activities, we don't necessarily have as buoyant economy that we would like to see. So basically, if demand is not strong enough, while you might have supply issues, you wouldn't necessarily anticipate substantial increases. But the numbers show it, quite frankly. If you look at where we started this year, we started at 8.2%. Right now we're at 9.0%. I think when we were forecasting at the start of the year, we said, one, that we did not anticipate the elections to cause any substantial increases in in the inflation statistics. But we just didn't have the elections. We had these other issues, especially the PMS one, which was a big knock on the economy, just economic activity. So that I think is probably more of the driving issue. But you can't discount both. Now you'd probably need some econometricians and research to be able to effectively distill which one has more of an effect, if it's the if something resulting from the elections, or is it from the PMS and kerosene diesel issues that we're dealing with.
Well, comment on this, if you will. You pointed out that we've seen a steady rise since the beginning of the year. And so now we have inflation rate at 9%. At the beginning of the year was 8.2%, yeah. Which means there's also a possibility that when we get the CPI for June, which will likely come out in July, we might also see another increase.
Again, well, it depends, right? So you just can't look at one aspect. You have to look at both, right? So you have instances where some employers are struggling to pay salaries, and basically what that means is that consumption power will be will take a knock, right? And then one other thing that usually happens is beyond the if you look at the numbers on the food side, what usually happens is by April, May, you start to have some rains come in to impact, the farmers, to water the farmers' crops. And then by June, what you tend to have is, harvest. So while the harvest might not be as good as we expect this year because rains have come in a little later, if the rains are good enough, you might start to see some easing in food prices next month, and food, the food subcategories has a substantial weight in the market basket or the overall CPI estimation process. So if that decreases, it's possible that you will then have maybe an increase, but maybe more muted. And then with the incoming administration, my personal opinion is that we would probably not have lingering PMS and kerosene issues. At least we will have some alleviation of the issues, and that could also pull down prices. Now another thing that also happens is while you have structural issues causing price increases, you also have people that literally would take advantage of the opportunity to any little bit the opportunity to increase prices. For instance, I wanted to buy a phone, and the gentleman told me, that the exchange rate had depreciated. This was a couple of months ago. I'm just using this for an instance, but he said the exchange rate had depreciated, so he had to raise the price. But I was like, more than likely he had this phone in his warehouse for months, and so he's already had the price. He's bought the phone, he has warehoused it. Well, you can understand he has to pay for some cost for keeping the phones. But now he's trying to market to maybe exchange rate movements, which I can understand. In some instances, if your price, if your good is pegged at the dollar, then I can see that. But in some instances, people just trying to take advantage of movements in things to just make a profit.
So that's one sector of the economy that you've talked about. That's the informal part, or semi-formal, yes, if you'd like to talk about it that way. Yes. But then we know that other aspects of the economy will be largely affected. For instance, this is one of the many data that the Central Bank of Nigeria has to go through before, that's the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria goes through before they make their decisions at their regular meetings. So what are your expectations? How do you think that this data is going to affect how the outcome of that meeting, the next meeting, will be?
Well, I'm not a policymaker. I could only speak as a statistician in this instance. I would defer to the central bank to and let their MPC meeting hold, and they will come up with whatever resolutions they want to make. I would say though that just, ongoing discussions with, some economists that I know, we haven't, hit the double-digit mark. So I know that the CBN, would definitely have hawkish eyes on the inflation stats, but I don't anticipate, substantial cause for perturbation. I think, from discussions I've had, I think, when we start to get into double-digit levels is when we start to have, possible drags on economic growth. And like I told you, the rains have kicked in, so we might, while vegetables, when rains come in, vegetables usually become more expensive, but things like yams, which are potatoes, other tubers, which have heavy weights in the index, may slow, as well as other food prices, food products, and that could also have some cascading effects in terms of the processed foods, which the central bank will also track. And so and if the economic administration just gets a handle on the PMS issue, which I think they will. I think within the next month, I don't think we'll be dealing with queues and all of that. I think we'll probably have more muted increases in inflation statistics.
So we're not expecting to see, for instance, heavy appreciation or heavy need for imported food affect inflation figures? Because I remember, the last conversation that Bosun had with Dr. Kale on the last figure when it came out was the fact that there was an increase in imported goods and products by Nigerians, which was one of the reasons why we saw inflation rate rising to 8.7%. But now it seems like it's more of a domestic issue.
It's not just one issue. There are a myriad of issues, and ultimately, what matters is what has the most pull or push, should I say, on the overall aggregate statistics. Do we import goods and services? Yes, we do. Now that said, imported food. If you look at even this past month, imported food prices were also high. So does that mean does it factor into the overall inflation statistics? Yes. But then you have that if that maybe slightly on the high side, but then you have all these like I said, if we have better harvests, and then we have some alleviation from the PMS and diesel issue. Then the domestic side, you'd have maybe a rewriting of all the structural shocks that you're seeing, and then easing in market conditions, and supply might kick back on. So then in that instance, domestic factors will overweigh the foreign, and then you have maybe a muted inflation rate for the month.
Well, thank you, Dr. Isikwe, for your analysis this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come on Business Morning, more data analysis will be analyzing the recent job creation and employment generation survey done by the National Bureau of Statistics. Mike Adeleye, he's a human capital development consultant, joins me after this break.